Hello everyone. If I look super sweaty today, it's because number one, it is hot, and number two, I just put on sunscreen, and so I probably look shiny, and that's just because life is like that. I wanted to talk about something. I've been reading up on this subject a lot lately, and it's just been very interesting to me, and so I thought it would be interesting to talk about in my videos. I've been talking, over the time that I've had this channel, a lot about sex and sex-related issues. So I talked about abortion for a while because I'd had an abortion, and then I kind of ended up jumping over into hypergamy, and from hypergamy I ended up talking about like the manosphere in general, and you know, women's differences from men, men's differences from women, all that interesting stuff. It was interesting, and so I talked about it. The trans issue is very interesting. The trans debate. Let me just say the trans debate. I don't want to say the trans issue, that sounds weird, but the trans debate is interesting, and it's, I don't know if you would call it the for or against. Like a lot of people will say anything that's critical of transgender people is transphobia. So I guess you would say the transgender people versus the transphobes, or the transgender people versus the TERFs. I don't know. I don't know what people who are critical of transgender people want to call themselves, because they're not exactly a unified group of people. They're just people who are like, hey, there's a problem here, and then it seems like if anything can be interpreted as being critical of transgender people, there's usually a bit of a backlash that comes along with it. So, you know, I don't really know what to call Group B, but, you know, Group A is, you know, transgender people, more specifically transgender activists. I don't know how many actual transgender people are siding with the more vocal public face of the trans community. But I thought it was interesting. You know, I've been reading up on it, and then I read some more, and then I read some more, and the more I read, the more interesting it is. And so it's like, you know what, I should talk about this. I should talk about the arguments that are floating around out there. Maybe touch on the sports issue, because that's interesting, and, you know, it's interesting. But there's more than just the sports issue. There's a lot of issues in the trans community. And I don't mean issues like, okay, the first issue, number one issue. Anything that sounds like it might possibly be critical of the trans community is automatically transphobic and bad, and you're bad for saying it, and you're bad for thinking it, and that's just bad. It's extremely dogmatic. Like, even people within the trans community will talk about how they feel like it's extremely dogmatic, and I've seen more than one occasion where people within the trans community have talked about feeling cautious, at the very least, about talking about things that they think, or mentioning opinions that they have, because they know that it will not be well received within the community around them. And that's a problem in any community. If you're in any group of people and you feel like you can't just say what you're thinking, that's a problem. And so, in the making of these videos, I have the feeling that I'm going to upset a lot of people just by mentioning the issues that people are debating. Like, if I say, okay, the trans activists are saying this, and the people who are arguing against them, for lack of a better term, are saying this. This is what one side's saying, this is what the other side's saying. I'm not taking sides, I'm just citing these different arguments that people are making. I'm pretty sure even that is going to piss people off. So I was telling one of my friends yesterday that I was, you know, thinking about making videos about this, and he was like, well, you know, if you want to start a flame war, that's the way to do it. And I'm like, great, this is going to be fun. I don't want to piss people off. I just have an incredible talent for pissing people off. So this should be interesting. All that being said, the first thing I want to talk about is the issue of trans legitimacy. The issue of trans legitimacy. And the reason I want to talk about that, there are a few different reasons. Reason number one, I spent a lot of time before making this video thinking about this video, and thinking I would love to talk about this subject because it is fascinating, but I'm afraid that the first thing that's going to happen is a bunch of people are going to jump down my throat and say, well, what gives you the right to talk about this? You know? Like, who are you to be talking about this stuff? And it's like, well, I'm a person on YouTube who likes talking about sex and gender, and, you know, it just seemed like a good fit for me. But I'm pretty sure that I'm going to get flack for that. And the other thing with trans legitimacy is, I think that people outside of the transgender community are not aware how much doubt and uncertainty exists within the trans community. There's this fly. There's a fly. There's this very... I think that anybody outside of the trans community tends to look at the trans community as a monolith. You know, you see the public face of the trans community and you think, okay, that's who these people are. Except that's not who these people are. There are so many different groups of people within the trans community with different reasons for being in the trans community, and like, being trans is not a one-size-fits-all thing at all. There are many, many different ways to be trans. There are many different ways to experience being trans, and so it's not a one-flavored kind of group of people. There's a lot of different things going on in there. And, I mean, that's why I think the most recent acronym I heard was 2SLGBTQT. I only heard it said twice, so I don't remember. I do understand why people call it alphabet soup. And that was another thing. Like, I was like, I'm going to make this video. And then I was like, oh, fuck, it's June. Fuck. And you might be saying, so you're anti-LGBT? Look, I'm the B in the LGBT, okay? I'm there. I've been there for 20 years, okay? I'm not saying anything about that. But have you ever, like, gone to a bar or a party or something with your friends, and then your friends get, like, ridiculously, like, stupid-ass drunk and start making, like, total idiots of themselves, and you're sitting there looking at the bartender with this big, awkward smile on your face, like, I'm not with them. No, I've never seen those people before in my life. Yeah, that. There's been some of that lately. There's been a lot of that lately. For me in particular, just because of some of the things I've been thinking about, some of the things I've been kind of meditating on. Like, nobody's complaining about the B and the LGBT these days. A lot of people are complaining about the T. So, again, going back to this idea of trans doubt and trans legitimacy, you know, I was trying to figure out how to talk about that, and I found this lovely article. I'm gonna scroll up to the top here. Reasons I Might Not Be Trans by Amanda Roman. I'm gonna put a link down below. She does this beautiful, and I would honestly say very courageous job of talking about her doubts and her insecurities as a trans woman. And I loved this article, because a lot of people who are publicly trans, they don't express any doubts. They're like, oh, I always knew. I've always known. I'm always gonna know, and it's just very clear cut for me. And then there are those people who are running around out there, and you see glimpses of them every once in a while, because people will make a response to their TikTok or something like, oh my God, did you see what this person said? Oh no, I'm really a woman. I'm going to be the first transgender woman to give birth to a baby because I'm going to get a uterus transplant. And it's like, biology much? Anybody? Biology? And I mean, ooh, how dare I be critical of a trans person? Well, I'm sorry, but, those drunk people at the bar, I'm not with them. So, yeah, I'm gonna read through this list, and I'm gonna talk about some of these issues, as they pertain to my own life, which I think is kind of interesting, because again, these are doubts that people have, but these are doubts that I've had in my own life as well, because I probably should be talking about that at some point. And, if you're sitting there going, wait a minute, you're talking about this like you are, you know, in that T category. Yeah, it might sound like that at times. It might really sound like that. And am I going to come out as transgender someday? Fuck no. Not the way things are going these days. No. But it's Pride Month. It's June. Fuck that. I'm not with those crazy drunk people over at the bar. And also, I have no intention of ever transitioning. Ever. In any way, shape, or form. So, as far as I'm concerned, if I identify as a fucking house cat, you guys don't need to know about it. That's a personal matter for me up here. So, item number 1 on the list. Reasons that I might not be transgender. I'm ignoring my depression. Some combination of factors is causing me to be depressed, and I'm ignoring those factors in favor of following this pointless delusion. I need antidepressants, not hormones. The factors I'm ignoring will persist, and the chemical imbalance in my brain will still be there after transition when I'm no longer distracted by this little biology project. And again, she's talking about her own personal doubts that she's experienced. If you read at the beginning of the article, she talks about how she's cataloging these so that she can keep them in mind and, you know, address them as they come up, know that she's had these thoughts before, know that she's dealt with these thoughts before. I think it's really smart what she's doing, because it's good to write down your thoughts, your feelings, your doubts, anything that you're struggling with inside your own head. It's really good to write that down, but then to have the courage to share those doubts with other people who are going through those same things, that's brave. That's actually very brave, and especially when it comes to being trans, especially because trans legitimacy is an issue, which is why I'm making this video. How do you know you're really trans? I asked somebody the other day, I was like, how do you know someone's trans? He's like, well, they transition. I was like, well, what if they can't transition because of, you know, physical danger? You know, they're in a situation where it's too dangerous to transition. He's like, well, I don't know. I was like, okay, what if they can't transition because they have medical problems and they can't take the hormones because they are already at risk for a stroke or something? I don't know. Well, are they not trans then? Like, does that make them less trans? Well, you know, transition is what makes someone trans. I'm like, okay. I mean, how do you know if someone's trans or not? I'm genuinely asking. I have no idea. As far as the depression thing, I felt strange during my depression. I had a lot of body dysmorphia, which is not the same as gender dysphoria. I had body dysmorphia. I remember sitting in front of a mirror one day and thinking that I wanted to get a kitchen knife out of the kitchen and just start hacking pieces of myself off. And I knew that wasn't good. I knew I was not in a good place mentally. I've had a few people who've commented that I'm a nutcase because they saw that video where I was, you know, in my car ranting. The reason I was ranting was because I had been misdiagnosed with bipolar, and so my therapist was very, very adamant that we treat my bipolar disorder. I didn't actually have bipolar disorder, so I spent several months paying thousands of dollars to this lady who didn't actually help me get better at all. And if you're sitting there thinking, well, what if you do have bipolar and she was right and you were wrong? Well, I'm on some medication right now that I wouldn't be able to be on if I actually had bipolar disorder. So, I mean, there's that. The good news is I'm on antidepressants and I'm feeling a lot better, but things are still a little weird. And I have to be honest, I have to address that. As time has passed in my life and I've consistently noticed the same feelings and the same emotions over a period of years, and in my case, decades, it kind of gets to the point where it's like, yeah, I don't think this was depression. Some of this was just me. But that is something to be aware of. You know, if people worry sometimes that it could be a mental health problem, and it's like, people question whether or not you're having a mental health problem when you start to express these feelings, like, are you not just really, really depressed? And people ask themselves that too, you know, am I feeling this way or am I just really, really depressed? I have seen people who have said that, trans people, I've seen detransitioners who've said that when you treat their mental health problems, their sense of gender dysphoria goes away, or at least goes down. And, I mean, let's be perfectly fair, that might actually be the case. Let's see that you are a trans person who's dealing with a lot of really difficult gender dysphoria, and the symptoms of gender dysphoria are very uncomfortable for you. If you're dealing with depression on top of that gender dysphoria, it's like you got two weights crushing you down instead of just one. And so it could be that there is an aspect of this that is related to mental illness. Can I say that safely without a bunch of people like jumping on me and being like, you're a horrible transphobe? Do I even care what people think about me? I don't know. Probably not. But I would like it if people would actually listen to the words that I'm saying instead of just assuming that what I'm saying is something bad. Does depression play a role in this? Well, it might. Oop, my computer just fell asleep. It might. And so, you know, if you are transgender and you are experiencing depression, treat the depression too. See if that doesn't help, you know? It can't hurt. I mean, if you're depressed, you're depressed. It's not fun being depressed. I just spent 2 years of my life being completely depressed. I was so depressed at one point that I could barely stand up for more than a couple minutes at a time. Like, I could get up and I could shuffle from one room to the next, and that was it. I was, like, practically bedridden. But it was, you know, it was still very difficult for my therapist to diagnose because she sort of sucked at her job. I haven't always known. Unlike so many trans people, I don't have any memories of wanting to be a girl from a young age. I was a boy, and a gender-conforming one at that. It wasn't until puberty that I started having these strange fixations, and even then, I didn't believe I was a girl or really even wanted to be one. I was just fascinated by the idea. I never doubted that I was male. I have no doubt that I am biologically female. That's never going to change. Like, I have no doubts. And as far as wanting to be a boy, there was no magic moment when I was like 2 years old that I went to my mom and said, I'm a boy. I remember being 3-ish, 4-ish, and being a very, very stereotypical little girl. I loved wearing long twirly dresses and like spinning around in circles so the dress would kind of go floofing out. I thought that was really fun. I wanted to be a ballerina. Instead, I ended up being a stripper. Oh well, close enough. And I wanted to do girly things. I was a little girl. When I was a little girl, I was actually a little girl. Things started to change sometime after I was 8 years old. I think that's when that's the earliest I started noticing little changes, little differences. I talked about how my childhood was a little bit rough. Some bad things started happening to me around the age of 8. I had to spend a lot of time and energy focusing on, staying alive. I had to deal with the fact that I didn't have a lot of safety in my life, and a lot of things happened to me that were dangerous, and I had to cope with those without any kind of help or support. I was very much on my own, and I had to be strong. I had to be really strong, and I survived all that. And that's a really great thing, but in that process, as the years went by, I never noticed it. I mean, now I can think about it because I'm going back through my life and I'm thinking, okay, I thought that was normal. I have a lot of, especially lately because I've been thinking about it more and more, I have a lot of, I thought that was normal kind of moments where it's like, oh, I thought that was normal. That's not normal? That isn't normal? Okay. I had no idea. So there isn't this sense of, oh my God, I'm just totally driven in this direction. And I certainly wasn't like that when I was 4 years old. It was something that started creeping up more and more as I got older, and as I approached puberty. And then, of course, once puberty hit, it also started kind of manifesting. And then in my teenage years, it was there. And this idea that I hear a lot where people are like, oh yeah, my kid's non-binary. How old is your kid? 1. My kid's 1 year old. It's like, well, that wasn't my experience of it, but okay. I'm very skeptical. A lot of people are very skeptical. That's one of the things I'm extremely skeptical of, I will say. I know a lot of people are going to jump down my throat for that, but it's like, dude, back when I was that age, I was a really girly little girl. I was very feminine, and I was very girly, and I wanted girly things. And it was only after some really messed up stuff happened to me that this other part of me started really taking charge and coming out. And I've seen a lot of trans people who are like, I didn't always know. And I think this narrative that people always know, like, even again, going back to my own experiences, like, I never would have guessed. Up until the point that I really took a good hard look at a lot of things that had been happening in my life that were a little strange, a little odd, Number 3, it's not strong enough. I'm not suicidal. Whatever condition I might have, it's mild. Other people, the ones who actually need to transition, have a more severe form. They're suffering. I'm not. They're obsessed with changing gender. I'm just interested in it. This is only a mild desire, not an inability to live in my current state. Nobody would do something this extreme unless they were their only option. That's interesting too, because like for me, I have no intention of ever transitioning to anything. I will never become a trans house cat. Ladies and gentlemen, it's just never going to happen. But also, it raises an interesting question for me. Question number 1, how come transition is the only option that's offered to people who are trans? Like, that's the gold standard. It's like, oh, you're trans, you have to transition. Let's start with your pronouns. It's like, why is that the only option? Why is that the only option anyone ever talks about? Like, Why is it always that? Why is it always, let's start you up on hormones? Or if you're really young, let's start you up on puberty blockers. Like, why is that the only option people get? And I mean, I understand a lot of people are like, so what, you don't want affirmative care? I just want people to have options. The more options, the better, right? Right? But as far as transition, it raises another interesting question, which is, when people do transition, what are the reasons that people transition? Like, there's a lot of discussion in the trans community, and this is the reason I'm reading this article partially, is because there are people who are like, well, I'm a true transgender person versus I'm not a true transgender person. For a person outside the community, this is automatically very confusing because it's like, well, what's the difference? And then for a person inside the trans community, it gets even more complicated because it's like, well, it's complicated. For example, when I first went to my therapist, my crappy therapist who misdiagnosed me with bipolar disorder, she asked me, well, do you experience gender dysphoria? Because I went to her with this issue. She's like, do you experience gender dysphoria? I was like, I don't think so. No, I've never had gender dysphoria. I was wrong, but that's another issue. I just never thought about it that way. And a lot of people who've written about their experiences of transitioning, their experiences of being transgender, they talk about how when they first start to realize it, when it first starts to dawn on them that something's going on, they don't have any awareness of experiencing gender dysphoria. It's like, well, if you grow up and you live your whole life being a certain way, and you don't know any other way of being, it's really hard to step outside of your own perspective and say, oh, yeah, this thing that I'm experiencing every single day isn't normal. That's difficult. And usually people rely on the feedback of the people around them, like, hey, that's not normal. Like, if you have a giant growth spouting out of your forehead, it's like, that's not normal. But if you're very quiet about it and you never talk about it with anybody, then you don't get that feedback. And I mean, I talked with some people, like, I talked with one person, very, very close person in my life, and I was like, what if one of your good friends came to you and told you they were transgender? And this guy was like, I mean, none of my good friends would do that. I was like, well, why? And he's like, well, I've known them for a long time. I would have noticed something, you know? And I mean, he would have noticed something, wouldn't he? I mean, he was a really, really observant guy. Really observant. And I was like, well, what if you didn't notice anyway? He's like, well, then we must not have been that good friends then. It's like, well, what if they didn't know? And so they didn't talk about it. And he's like, I would have noticed something. I was like, yeah, about that. So there's a lot there. There's so much. Like, this whole article, there's so much to talk about. That's the wonderful thing about this subject. There's so much to talk about, and I haven't even gotten to the for and against arguments. When does a person need to transition? Like, people talk about suicidality and how you need to transition to prevent suicide. There's a lot of that. Oh, you gotta transition or you're gonna be at risk for suicide. I'm 36 years old. I have been suicidal at multiple points in my life. It never had to do anything with my gender identity. It had to do with all the other messed up shit that was happening in my life. But when I took care of the other messed up shit that was happening in my life, all of a sudden I just didn't feel suicidal anymore. Kind of funny how that worked out. So, you know, why do people need to strictly be suicidal in order to transition, or do people need to transition when they feel that it's necessary to transition? What makes it necessary to transition? These are all questions that, you know, you could spend hours and hours asking and then discussing, which I would love to do. I think it'd be great if I could find some people to talk about it with me. That would be really cool. But also, I'm sure I can find several articles about it. Like, when is it time to transition? When is a good idea to transition? You know, is it something that's necessarily something you have to do, or is it something that you should, you know, at some point maybe consider doing and then decide to do? It's a fetish. Number 4. Autogynephilia, transvestism, transformation fetish, whatever. It's a sex thing. It turns me on, so it doesn't belong in the real world. Making life decisions based on sexual arousal is for perverts who can't separate fantasy from reality. She wrote this, not me. These were her words. And this is her own dialogue that she has with herself when she's feeling self-critical, when she's doubting herself, when she's doubting her decision to transition. And again, it takes a lot of courage to share these deep insecurities that can arise when you are a transgender person. And these are insecurities that she feels, that she thinks, and I tend to agree with her, a lot of trans people might also be feeling. It was something that I thought about a lot, especially in the beginning. It's like, oh God, you know, autogynephilia has a gendered counter, which is autoandrophilia, I believe. Autoandrophilia. And that was the first thing that freaked me out. Like, because usually the stories that you hear about people who reach their mid-30s and then decide to transition, early 30s, mid-30s, you know, they're married, they have kids, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, you know what, I just realized I'm trans. It's because of autogynephilia. It's because they have this fetish and it's been growing and growing and growing inside their head, and all of a sudden it's just like, look, I've hit the point where I really need to change some things about my life. And so I was afraid of that, and it was like, okay, that's not what's going on here. It just isn't. Like, I thought about it for a long time. It was like, okay, do I get aroused by the idea of being a man and having sex as a man? It's like, I get aroused by the idea of having sex. No, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. That's not it. In my case, it's just not it. That's not what's going on. And I realized that particularly when I started going back over these experiences that I've had through the years in my life. And it's like, you know what? You were not aroused at the idea of being a man when you were 10 years old. Not even remotely. You weren't aroused at the idea of being a man when you were 16 years old. You weren't aroused at the idea of being a man when you were 18 years old. You were not sexually aroused by these things. And you're not sexually aroused by these things now. You're just afraid of being sexually aroused by these things. But that's me in my own individual case. And that's kind of where I go back to that whole, the trans community is not a monolith. There are lots of different reasons that people end up identifying as trans. I have my reasons, this person has her reasons. And in her case, from some of the things that she's written, she seems to have what's called autogynephilia, which is she is aroused at the idea of herself being a woman. She finds that sexually exciting, and a lot of trans women do. And at first I was kind of like, that's different, that's kind of strange. And then the more I thought about it, like I talked to my husband about it. I was like, okay, this is a thing, and it kind of weirds me out, mostly because I was afraid that it was something that was going on with me, and it was like weirding me out about myself. And he was like, yeah, so? And I was like, wait, what? And he's like, well, I mean, people get aroused by things. People get aroused by weird things. So what? And that kind of stopped me for a minute, and it was like, yeah, why is that a problem? That's not a problem. I mean, that's not a problem. The point at which some people have argued that it does become a problem, and I kind of tend to agree with them to a certain degree, is when you take your sexual fetish and start pushing it into the world outside of yourself. And I'm not talking about just transitioning. I'm talking about people who get weird about it. There's a certain common sense element that I think is kind of lacking these days. It's like, I saw a video just a little while ago of a trans woman, we'll say trans woman, who did not look particularly healthy, who was bragging about how other women's husbands were sliding into her DMs because she was just so sexy and everybody wanted what she had. And I was like, that's not appealing even when it's a normal, regular, biological woman saying it. I don't want to say cis woman because a lot of people say cis woman and it's like, okay, so you're taking normal woman and you're turning it into a thing. Like a separate category, and that's just what a woman is. Like, that's just what a woman is. So yeah, like some things, you know, just maybe don't put that on the internet. Like, don't take that and stick it up there where everybody can see you being kind of pervy, because it is kind of pervy. It is pervy when you're like creeping on other people's husbands and like, dude, just calm the fuck down, you know? If you're on a porn site and you're talking like that, that's one thing. But when you're just out in the world, like, being overtly over-sexual is just... Dude, calm down. Calm down. And I don't mean dude in the masculine sense. I mean dude in the every general person, like, just a phrase sense, okay? Number 5, I'm not feminine. I don't like dresses or makeup. My interests and behaviors are masculine. I don't want to express myself any different than I do now. What's the point of becoming a woman if all I'm going to do is be the same person I am now, but with boobs?
So I forgot to mention this at the time of filming, but I think it's very relevant. It is probably much healthier to transition for your own sense of personal aesthetics and your own self-image than to transition just for the way other people might perceive you or what you think people might expect of you. So I definitely applaud her for that.
I've never had dysphoria. Growing up, I didn't hate my body. I didn't look in the mirror and cry. I never had any urges to cut off my penis. Puberty was not a traumatizing experience, at least no more than usual. I may want a female anatomy, but I don't dislike my male one. The whole point of transitioning is to resolve dysphoria, to alleviate suffering. I need to suffer more to justify transitioning. Again, I have no interest in transitioning, but I mean, it again raises this point, this idea, like, at what point does a person need to transition? Maybe a person needs to transition when they want to transition, when they feel like they need to transition. And I mean, that's not a thing that should be criticized. If somebody feels like they need to transition, then, you know, let them transition. But at the same time, there's also this element of legitimacy, this element of, oh, well, if you're trans, you have to have had dysphoria. The problem with that is some people aren't aware that they have dysphoria until, you know, after some time has passed and they put a lot of thought into it. I'm looking at myself here. I really didn't think I had dysphoria, and then, you know, then I thought about it. And other people just don't experience it. If you're not a gynophile, you're probably not going to experience dysphoria. You just really, really want to transition. Is that bad? Is that wrong? No, that's actually, I don't think that's a bad thing. There's no female identity. My internal perception of myself is not of a woman. I have no real internal perception of myself at all. No soul, no innate understanding, no alter ego. Saying that I'm really a woman or even a trans woman feels absurd. Being trans means having a gender identity that does not match your birth sex, so without a female gender identity, I cannot be transgender. That would be a really awful argument to have to make to yourself, and the thing is, like, you want to transition, you want to live your life as a woman, you are transgender. You are doing these things, you are actively making these choices. That's what it is to be transgender. That's the only definition that we really have right now. Am I transgender? I'm transgender because I say I'm transgender. That's the only working definition that we have right now. It's a really, really shitty definition because it's so ambiguous that nobody knows what it means. That's why it's a shitty definition. It's not a shitty definition because we need to start, you know, gatekeeping being transgender for people. It's just, we don't know what it is. We don't know. In my own case, that was never a problem. There was never any doubt. That was the one thing that was really, really certain for me. When I actually just sat down and looked at it, it was like, okay, what do you identify as? It's like, well, honestly, yeah, that's pretty clear-cut. That part I totally understand. Do I want to transition? No. Do I want to announce to the world that I am that? No, I do not. I have no interest whatsoever in telling anyone what I identify as. We're going to joke right now. This is not serious. It's a house cat. I mean, you got to smile about something. I mean, what would it be like to be a house cat? What would it be like to identify as a house cat? I'm kind of happy I don't identify as a house cat, come to think of it. Number 8, it's an escape fantasy. Like moving to New Zealand or living on a sailboat, this is just another way of wishing I could leave my old life behind and start a new one. Transition would be a reset button, a do-over, a fantastical deus ex machina. Whatever you want to call it, it's me hoping for a magical solution to my problems and not taking responsibility for the decisions that I've made and the life I've built. Now that's an interesting one. Until I read that, I had never thought about it in those terms, and immediately after reading it, I was like, dude, I could dwell on that one for a long time. Does that apply to me? Is that what's going on here? I never thought about it, but now that you mention it, that's something I need to think about. I mean, it doesn't account for all the stuff that happened in my life in previous decades, so there's that. But at the same time, that's interesting. I remember when I first brought it up to my husband, he thought it was a midlife crisis. Or he thought something in my life was a midlife crisis. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the fact that I was really, really depressed and we ended up talking about divorce for a while. But that happened because he had a brain tumor. It wasn't a midlife crisis. But maybe this is a midlife crisis. But I don't want to change anything. I like my life exactly the way it is, and I don't want to change anything at all. So as midlife crises go, this is extremely mild. Number 9, it's trendy. Everyone's doing it. Being trans is the hot new thing. It's on TV and in magazines, and people are passing laws about it, so of course it's constantly on my mind. It's normal to think you have a condition when everyone is raising awareness about it. That I can relate to so much. Oh my god, yes. There has been talk of something called social contagion. There's been talk of something called rapid onset gender dysphoria. I read an article about it last night. And I mean, this is the thing. I want to talk about all this stuff. And the article was talking about how there are some people who have argued that it's like the quote-unquote autism epidemic. I wasn't even aware of the autism epidemic, but it makes sense. Where they improved their diagnostic tools for identifying whether a person has autism, and all of a sudden they're finding it everywhere. And it's like, oh my god, is there this sudden rise in cases of autism? Well, no, actually not really. What's happening is we've gotten better at identifying when someone has autism, so now we can find them, diagnose them, and get them help so that they can live better, easier lives. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And so, is that what's going on with the trans community? A lot of people have argued that it is, but the one thing that they have not been able to account for, and this is what the article was pointing out, is the fact that the only real major rise in cases of being transgender, identifying as transgender, has been among teenage girls. And they're looking at it saying, okay, that could actually be a social contagion, because social contagion happens a lot in teenage girls. That specific population is very prone to social contagion. So, cutting, self-mutilation, anorexia, bulimia. When I was young, being bisexual, I remember telling my mom I was bisexual, and her looking at it and saying, "Oh, honey, that's just because your friends are gay, and you're just being socialized to do this. It's a trend. It's a phase. You're going through a phase. You aren't actually bisexual, dude. I fucked women, and I liked it. I'm not taking that back. I'm sorry. Like, that one's solid. That's staying. Okay. I might be married to a man. I'm never gonna have sex with another woman because I'm married to a man and we're monogamous." And I'm not going to cheat on him, obviously, so that's never going to happen again. But dude, the fact that it happened in the first place, I liked it. Not taking that one back. So if it was a social contagion, it contagion the living hell out of me. I kind of don't think that one was a phase. I'm just gonna put that out there. But as far as being trans, yeah, that was one of the things. That was one of the things that I was really. I looked at my own life and it was like, okay, how the fuck is this not just you hearing about this all the time in the news and being like, oh, well, I must have it too. That's what's going on, right? Right. That's what's going on. So you don't talk about this. Don't talk about this. Don't let anyone know about this. Don't let anyone know you're thinking about this, because 5 months from now, you're going to feel like a real idiot for bringing it up, right? Right. If a year from now I look back on this video and feel all cringe about it, like, oh my god, I can't believe I said that, then just know that I'm feeling awkward, and, the social anxiety is kicking in, and I'm like wishing that I could crawl into a hole and die. But in the meantime, I'm looking at this and it's kind of like, okay, it's a social contagion. It's a social contagion that I had 2 decades ago. More than 2 decades ago. It's been there for a while. It was there before it got... This is where I make that edgy comment, like, I was doing this and feeling this before it was cool. Yeah. I will say with the social contagion thing, I never would have connected the dots if it wasn't something people were talking about all the goddamn time. Like, if people would just shut up about it, I probably would stop thinking about it. It wouldn't mean that I would stop having these thoughts. The thoughts have been constant. That's never stopped. That's never gone away. But I wouldn't think there was anything unusual about having those thoughts. Like, that's normal, right? It's normal to wish you were, a member of the other gender. I mean, who doesn't occasionally wish that they were, the opposite gender? So in my case, a man. Who doesn't occasionally wish they were a man? Like, everybody does that. Everybody does that once in a while. Everybody does that a couple times a week. Everybody does that on a nearly daily basis. Everybody does that, right? I mean, for a long time I thought, well, of course I imagine myself being a man because male is the default in our society. So of course I see myself as a man. I know I'm a woman. I realize I'm a woman. I just tend to perceive myself as being male because that's the default setting in our society, right? Right? That's what's going on. So it's perfectly normal. Very normal. Very normal. I'm not sure that's normal. I'm idealizing others' experiences. The grass is always greener in the other bathroom. Being female seems great, but I really just don't understand the hardships that women go through on a regular basis, and if I did, I wouldn't desire that life. I would just recognize my own male privilege and be grateful for it. I have had the exact same experience in the other direction, where it's like, I don't know why I didn't put the pieces together sooner, but here I am doing this whole channel where I'm reviewing books that are made for men and trying to give like a female perspective because I've lived as a woman my entire life, and it's like, oh, this is interesting right here. This is something I've experienced from the other side. Let me share this with you guys because this is interesting. I love talking about gender. I love it. I love exploring these questions, and it's like I really feel a very strong sense of empathy and support for men because there are a lot of ways in which our society just screws men over royally. And, there is that. And so, that's normal. Women feel that way. Women feel that way. That's normal. But then I look at things that I've been feeling for kind of a long time that I just assumed were normal that are probably not quite as normal as I thought they were. And it's like, you know what? Why I should just be happy that I am where I am, because if I ever did transition, number one, I haven't been socialized to be a man. I have not been raised to be a man. Like, I was at a barbecue with a bunch of friends and family, and it was a really wonderful event. There's this lovely older gentleman who throws it like every year, and he invited us, and it was just wonderful. It was a potluck, so I made a dessert for it, and my son was there. All my kids were there, but my son was there, and this older gentleman walks up to him, and he gives my daughters each a hug, and then he holds out his hand to my son and says, shake my hand. And my son didn't know what to do, and because he's a little kid. And so this older man starts teaching him how to give a good handshake. You give a firm grip. Okay, a little firmer. Okay, squeeze my hand real tight. That's good. That's good. That's a firm grip. And then you always look somebody in the eye when you give them a handshake. And I was looking and I was like, this is stuff that I never had. And it's really awesome that my son is getting it, because this is healthy. This is how he's going to grow up to be a healthy, well-adjusted man in his society, which is very important. But me, if I just, waved a magic wand and ding, all of a sudden, you're a dude, congratulations, here's your penis, I would be so lost. I would be so lost. I mean, I'm already very crass and very uncouth, and I get away with a lot of shit because I'm small and I'm cute. And I know it. Okay? I can get away with saying really, really inappropriate shit because, I'm dinky, I'm tiny, and there's nothing about me that's intimidating, because any person, most people, could very easily kick the living shit out of me if they felt even the slightest need to do so, in a defensive manner. I wouldn't know how to be a man. I would be so lost. And it was really funny because when I was talking with another person that I know, and I said, like, hey, this is a thing. And the first thing they said is, you don't know the first thing about being a man. Why on earth would you want to be a man? I'm like, dude, I don't know the first thing about being a man. I study being a man all the time. I study men being men all the time. I study what it's like to be a man all the time because I think it's fascinating, and I think I might spend the rest of my life studying the differences between men and women, what men go experiencing, men's rights, and ways that our society needs to be better toward men. I mean, that's important to me. I care about that shit. But do I know what it's like to be a man? No. No. I mean, the more I study it, the more I realize I don't know how to be a man at all. And I mean, that's one of the reasons I spend so much time studying it. It's fascinating to me. And it's like this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful other world that I'm never, ever going to be a part of. But I can at least look over there and be like, God, I wish. It's lovely. It's lovely over where you guys are. And that's a feeling. That's an emotion that I have. Men have a lot of problems they got to deal with. They have a lot of things stacked against them in this society. I will be the first one to say I am lucky to be a woman in this society because my life has been very, very easy in a lot of ways that I'm very, very grateful for. It doesn't mean I don't have these feelings, though. It doesn't mean I don't feel a little weird sometimes. It's just a midlife crisis. Oh my God. Okay, so it's a midlife crisis. That's what I was being told. I was told that one. Major milestones are behind me, and I'm having an existential crisis causing a desire to make major changes in my life. I'm just trying to relive my youth and capture experiences I feel I've missed. One thing I'm noticing as I get older in my own life, I don't want to act age appropriate. Like, that's a decision that I think I'm making right here now. A couple years ago. This is a decision that I've kind of come to where it's like I realize more and more as I get older and older that age appropriate is not for me. Let me clarify that before somebody takes it in creepy, weird direction. There's this poem I heard a long time ago, and usually people talk about the first lines of that poem and not much else. And it's like, when I am an old woman, I shall wear purple and do as I please, or something like that. I don't know the whole poem. And I mean, it was always about womanhood, so I was honestly never interested in it. But now that I'm getting a little older, I'm coming to this point where it's like, I think that society expects me to quiet down, stop going out at night, stop being wild and adventurous, stop experiencing novelty and new things, because you're stable now. You're married, and that's a stable position. You have kids, and that's a stable position. You live in one spot. You put down roots. That's stability right there. So you need to be stable and act stable and be boring as fuck, because that's stability. I don't want that. I don't want that. My mind is far too restless for that. I would be bored out of my fucking mind if I was a stable person. I want to go out at night. And I was talking to my husband, maybe it was last week, and he was talking about this bar that he goes to. He's like, we should go to a bar together. And I was like, that would be amazing. That would be wonderful. Let's have a day where we leave the kids at grandma's, and you and I, because you're my best friend, you're the person I want to go out to a bar with if I'm going to go out to a bar with anyone. Let's go out to a bar, and let's just hang out at a bar for a while. Let's do that. Let's go out at night. There's something I love about the night. I worked at night all the time when I was a dancer, and that was years and years and years of my life. That was like 8 years of my life. And I loved going out, and especially in this part of the country. Like, where I lived, it wasn't so much a thing, but when I moved here, the thing that I noticed was that the air is humid, and so it gets this velvety softness to it at night. And so you step outside, you breathe it into your lungs, and it's thick and soft, and it's comfortable in your lungs, and you just kind of look at it and go, ah. Like, I love being out at night. Night is just my time. And so then I've got these bags under my eyes, in part because I've been doing the burning the candle at both ends kind of thing, where it's like, well, I gotta wake up at 6 a.m. to get the kids ready for school, or 5 a.m. to get the kids ready for school. I gotta wake up at this time. I gotta be up. I gotta be ready. I gotta make breakfast. But, at 11 o'clock at night, I'm like stepping outside, just going, yeah. And so then I'm like dead tired because I got like 4 hours of sleep or 5 hours of sleep or whatever, and it's like, it's worth it. It's worth it just to breathe that night air into my lungs. So, again, is it a midlife crisis? I mean, I don't want to change anything. So, I think it's just the point at which I finally started connecting all the dots. You sit there and you're hearing news talking points about transgender people. You're hearing arguments about transgender people. My God, like, one of the things that really just, Jesus, that shooting at the school. My kids go to a school just like that. My kids are the age of the kids that got killed in that shooting. That was, at that point, I knew. And I was just sitting there like, oh, Jesus, you gotta be kidding me. You gotta be fucking kidding me. That's a whole nother video. That was a fucking mess. I'm not with those crazy people at the bar. Those crazy junk people at the bar with me, I'm not really with them. Please, please don't lump me in with them. I'm not like them. No, really, I'm not like them. Please. Number 12, I'm in an echo chamber. Reading transgender forums and media articles and going to support groups means I'm getting biased information. Of course I'm going to think I'm transgender if I surround myself with transgender people. That's just human nature, to conform yourself to the group. Well, I can safely say that is not a problem for me. I am out here all by myself. I have not gone to the transgender forums. I've not talked with anyone on a transgender forum. I haven't gone to a transgender support group. I'm actually thinking about going to a transgender support group just because I kind of have issues that I need to talk about with people, and I don't want to be on a forum. I don't trust people that I can't look dead in the eye. And so, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm not in an echo chamber. Is it getting talked about all the time? Yes. Is the fact that it's getting talked about all the time kind of... There were moments, like a year and a half ago, there were moments where I would say things and it would be like, oh my God, you sound just like one of them. Knock it off or people are going to think you're one of them. If you keep acting like this, folks are going to think you're one of them. One of them, Okay, so I'm one of them. I didn't know. But I'm not in an echo chamber, I can say that much. And number 13, I just want attention. I want to be special. I want to be part of that unique 0.3% of the population. To have a life experience that will set me apart from the boring masses. I'm only doing this so I'll have an interesting story to tell at parties. Dude. That's one of the reasons I didn't talk about it for a long time. That's one of the reasons I kept on questioning it for a long time. Like, okay, you feel this way, but how do you know? How do you really know? And the thing that finally really sealed it was just looking back throughout those years and years and years of experiences that I couldn't really explain any other way. Like I told my husband last night, I have all these memories, and they're like stars glittering in the night sky. These little teeny experiences, these passing comments that people made to me. Nothing big, nothing grand, nothing that would be important or nothing that should be as emotionally charged as it is. Someone in a grocery store mistook me for a man and said, "Sir, could you please help me with this?" I was at the Walmart. I was stocking shelves. "Sir, could you please help me with this?" And I went over and, helped him, and immediately he realizes when I'm standing next to him and talking to him with my voice, he's like, "Oh, ma'am, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize." I should have forgotten that. I should have forgotten that months and months ago. At the very least, I should have laughed it off and been like, "That's a funny one. Can you believe that guy thought that?" I shouldn't feel the way I feel about that. And that's not the first time it's happened. In fact, I remember every single time in my life that has happened. And every single one of them is like this brilliant flash of intense emotion. What does that mean, What does that mean? But yeah, I just want attention, I just want to be special. God, that's the reason I didn't just come out and say, "Hey, I identify as, pleh." I'm not saying that. I don't want to say that. I do not want to say that. I don't want your attention. I want to talk about an interesting issue. I want to talk about things that are interesting, because interesting things are sparkly and shiny, and I'm easily distracted, and it's like, oh my god, there is so much information on transgenderism, on the transgender community, on transgender beliefs, on transgender ideology versus things that are, you know, opposed to transgender ideology. There's all this information. I love information. Information is fun. Let's talk about some information. You know, this is interesting. So anyway, that's the end of the list. And I've talked about myself throughout most of this. And the reason I've talked about myself throughout most of this is just to discuss some of my own doubts and fears, and also to talk about how this list is relatable to trans people. There's a lot of trans people who are hearing this list, and different items on this list are going to hit different people in different ways. For example, I'm not particularly concerned about autogynephilia or autoandrophilia in my case. It's not a thing. It's not there for me. Like, I just look at it as like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not the case. So there's no part of me that's questioning my identity and going, is it just because you're getting turned on? Is it just because you're horny? No, that's not a problem for me. It could be a problem for other people. People who are autogynephilic, yeah, that they might be experiencing some very deep self-doubt because of that. I think the final point, the most important point at the end of this video, is that there is a lot of self-doubt in the trans community. And there are a lot of people who don't want to ask questions in the trans community, because the trans community is extraordinarily dogmatic, and that is unhealthy. I'm not saying trans people are unhealthy. Let me be very clear. The community itself is unhealthy. And when a community is unhealthy, then the people inside that community, the transgender people who live in that community, they suffer. And they suffer unnecessarily. You should be allowed to ask questions. Don't be a dick about it. You know, don't be a dick about it. But you should be allowed to ask questions. Questions are important. If you don't ask the question, you don't know the answer. If a question has never been asked, then no one knows the answer. That has been my rule. It was my rule when I was in church dealing with a bunch of Christian fundamentalists who were like, how dare you question that? I question because I question everything, because if I don't ask questions, I don't know the answers to those questions. I don't know that I have faith until I question my own faith. Well, that's what faith is about. Well, maybe it is for you, but for me, I have to ask questions. That's just how I interact with the world around me. I ask questions and I gather information. There's so much doubt in the trans community. There's so many people who are probably feeling uncertain and probably worried and doubtful, and they don't feel comfortable experiencing their doubts. And that's another thing. Amanda Roman, the author of this article, wrote another article called Trans Doubt. And it's beautiful. Like, she's written two really, really beautiful articles here. I'm going to put the link in the description for this one as well. Trans Doubt by Amanda Roman. And she talks about how she's in this support group, and on occasion, after listening to an emotional attendee describe their fears and doubts around whether to start or continue transition, the moderator will ask the group if anyone has ever felt or thought the same way, usually by quoting the original person's exact words. Then, like we're in a kindergarten class or a Republican primary debate, everyone will dutifully raise their hands. Who here has ever thought, what the fuck am I doing about their transition? Every hand rises. What about in just the past week? Most hands remained raised. Doubt is a big part of being transgender. Questioning is a big part of being transgender. Questioning is a huge part of the LGBT community. And it's something that was just openly acknowledged when I was young. I don't know what it's like these days, because I really haven't been too up to date on what's going on with the community these days. I'm busy being a housewife and, you know, for all intents and purposes, appearing very, very straight. Questioning was a big thing when I was young, because I was a teenager and I was with a bunch of lesbians that I was hanging out with who were my friends, and it was like, yeah, questioning is the very first step. Everybody goes through a process where they ask the question, am I gay? Am I gay? You know, you don't know the answer until you ask the question. It's just one of those funny little things, huh? And so, you know, a lot of people in the trans community, they have all these questions, they have all these doubts, they have all these little things that are uncertain, that are shifting around inside their heads. We don't have a clear definition of what it is to be trans, so that probably doesn't help things very much. And it's like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm going through this process of life, you know, I'm going through this process of self-discovery and self-actualization, self-realization, all this wonderful stuff, but I have a lot of uncertainties about all this. That's normal. That is the trans experience. And so, you know, that's something that I think people outside the trans community don't realize. Because a lot of people in the trans community feel like we have to have this sense of iron resolve, you know. I totally knew that I was the way that I am from day one. I came out of the womb with a little trans flag wrapped around my, you know, wrapped in my fist, just clutched there tight as could be. That's not what it's like. That's not how people are. That's not how people experience the world. People ask questions, people feel uncertainty, people feel self-doubt. And when you're making a big life-changing decision like, hey, I think I'm going to, you know, announce to the world that I identify as a different gender, and then try to make myself appear as much as possible as that gender and live my life as that gender, that's a big change. If you don't have at least a little bit of self-doubt, there's something really wrong going on there, you know? Are there a few people in this world who have zero self-doubt? Yeah. But I don't think that's necessarily very mentally healthy. You have to ask the question to know the answer. And you will continually ask the question because we don't have a clear working definition of what it is to be trans. So we don't know what makes a person legitimately trans. And at this point in time, it's just, well, I am because I say I am. And you're just going to have to live with that? I don't know. I don't know. I do not have the answers there. That's the first video. I'm going to be talking about this a lot. And if you are sitting here going, you know what, this just isn't my cup of tea, if you want to hear more book reviews, I would honestly recommend Subscribestar. I'm making it my mission to have a new video up on Subscribestar every week. These are the people who've supported me. These are the people who've really helped me out. These are the people who've stayed with me despite the fact that I went through a 2-year-long depression, which was absolute hell for me, but it was probably really frustrating for them because I wasn't putting out content. I'm going to do book reviews over there. I just finished The Alpha Unplugged. I finished doing a bunch of reviews of that. And now I want to move on to, I think I'm going to start doing 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. I think that's going to be a really interesting book to review. I think it's going to be an interesting book to read, which is one of the reasons I want to do it. And I also think it's going to be really informative. So if you're interested on a book review of that book, head on over to Subscribestar. It's $1 a month, which isn't much. And if you want to pay more, you can pay more, but you don't have to. I don't want to I don't want to make you guys pay a lot of money. Like, just head over and see what it's like. But if you want to check that out, that's what a lot of the book review stuff is going to be on. I will be continuing to do the Tactical Guide to Women as well. But occasionally I'm going to be posting these videos. So, just to let you know. So anyway, that's it for this video. I don't know if this is what you guys are interested in, but it's interesting. And so I'm going to keep making videos about this, and maybe people are going to unsubscribe, and maybe people are going to stay tuned to see what kinds of interesting things we learn about. Maybe this isn't your cup of tea, and again, I will be doing more videos on the Tactical Guide to Women. But this was just really fascinating, and I think I'm really attracted to the two opposing viewpoints because each side has some very valid points that they're discussing, and I want to see what those are. And maybe you do too. So stay tuned, and I'll talk to you guys later.